Margaret Chen straightened her black designer dress and checked her watch for the third time. 7:30 in the evening, and she was standing in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, surrounded by people she barely knew, at an event she didn't want to attend. The charity gala for underprivileged children was exactly the kind of thing that made her uncomfortable. As the CEO of TechFlow Solutions, Margaret was used to boardrooms, not ballrooms. She preferred spreadsheets to small talk and quarterly reports to charity events. But her PR team had been very clear about this. The company needed better community relations, and her presence at this gala would show that TechFlow cared about more than just profits. Margaret picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and surveyed the room. Wealthy donors mingled with charity organizers, everyone dressed in their finest clothes. Large photographs of smiling children hung on the walls, along with banners explaining how donations would help provide education, food, and shelter for kids in need. She moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, shaking hands and making polite conversation. Most people knew who she was. At 38, Margaret had built TechFlow from a small startup into a company worth millions. Business magazines called her brilliant. Her employees respected her even if they found her intimidating. She had worked hard to earn that reputation. "Ms. Chen, thank you so much for coming tonight," said a woman with kind eyes and graying hair. She wore a simple blue dress and had the tired but determined look of someone who worked with children every day. "I'm Elena Rodriguez, director of Sunshine Children's Home." Margaret shook her hand politely. "It's my pleasure," she said, though they both knew it wasn't really true. Elena smiled anyway. "Would you like to meet some of our children? A few of them are here tonight." Before Margaret could think of a polite way to decline, Elena was already leading her across the room. Near the back wall, away from the main crowd, sat a small group of children. They ranged in age from about 8 to 15, all dressed in their best clothes, which Margaret could tell had been donated or borrowed for the occasion. "Kids, I'd like you to meet Ms. Chen," Elena said warmly. "She runs a very successful company here in the city." The children looked up at Margaret with curious eyes. Some smiled shyly, others seemed more guarded. Margaret felt awkward under their gaze. She wasn't used to children. In her world of business deals and corporate meetings, she rarely encountered anyone under 25. "Hello," Margaret said stiffly, unsure of what else to say. A boy with messy brown hair grinned at her. "Do you have a big office with a fancy chair?" Margaret found herself almost smiling. "Yes, I do." "That's cool," the boy said. "I want to be a businessman when I grow up. Or maybe a firefighter." Elena chuckled. "This is Danny. He changes his career plans about once a week." Margaret's eyes moved to a girl sitting quietly at the edge of the group. She looked to be about 12, with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Unlike the others, she wasn't looking at Margaret. Instead, she stared down at her hands, which Margaret noticed were moving silently across her lap as if she were playing an invisible piano. "And who's this?" Margaret asked, nodding toward the quiet girl. "That's Sophia Martinez," Elena said gently. "Sophia, can you say hello to Ms. Chen?" Sophia looked up briefly, her dark eyes meeting Margaret's for just a moment before looking away again. "Hello," she said so quietly Margaret could barely hear her. "Sophia loves music," Elena continued. "She's always humming or moving her fingers like she's playing piano. It's like music lives inside her head all the time." Margaret watched as Sophia's fingers continued their silent dance. There was something almost magical about the way the girl moved her hands, as if she could hear melodies that no one else could hear. "Has she ever had piano lessons?" Margaret asked. Elena shook her head sadly. "We don't have the resources for music lessons. There's an old piano at the home, but it hasn't been tuned in years. Sophia taught herself to read music from a book someone donated, but she's never had proper instruction." Margaret found this interesting despite herself. In her business, she was always looking for raw talent, people with natural ability who just needed the right opportunity. But this was different. This was a child, not an employee. "She must be very dedicated to learn on her own," Margaret said. "Oh, she is," Elena replied. Sophia practices every day, even without a real piano. She made herself a keyboard out of cardboard and labeled all the keys. It's quite impressive, actually. As Elena spoke, more people gathered around them. Word had spread that the CEO of TechFlow was talking to the children, and donors were curious to see what she might say or do. Margaret began to feel uncomfortable with all the attention. A man in an expensive suit joined the group. Margaret recognized him as Robert Hamilton, owner of several car dealerships in the city. He was known for making grand gestures at charity events, always making sure the local newspaper photographed his donations. "Well, well," Robert said loudly. "Looks like our children have caught the attention of our most successful businesswoman. Tell me, Ms. Chen, are any of these kids inspiring you to open your wallet tonight?" Margaret bristled at his tone. She didn't like being put on the spot, especially by someone like Robert who seemed to treat charity like a competition. "I think all children deserve opportunities," Margaret said carefully. "Oh, come on," Robert laughed. "Surely you can be more specific than that. What about this little musician here?" He gestured toward Sophia, who shrank back at the sudden attention. "I bet if she could actually play piano, you'd be impressed enough to make a real difference in her life." Margaret felt a flash of annoyance. She hated being manipulated, and Robert was clearly trying to pressure her into making some kind of public commitment. The crowd around them had grown larger, and she could feel everyone waiting for her response. Without thinking, Margaret heard herself saying, "If she can actually play piano well enough to impress me, maybe I'll adopt her." The words were out before she could stop them. It was exactly the kind of sharp, dismissive comment she might make in a business meeting when someone presented her with an unrealistic proposal. But this wasn't a boardroom, and Sophia wasn't a business proposition. A few people in the crowd laughed nervously. They knew Margaret's reputation. Everyone in the city's business community knew that Margaret Chen lived alone in a downtown penthouse, worked 12-hour days, and had never shown any interest in children or family life. The idea of her adopting anyone seemed impossible. Sophia's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with hurt and surprise. For a moment, the girl looked directly at Margaret, and Margaret saw something in those eyes that made her stomach twist with unexpected guilt. It wasn't just hurt, it was determination. Elena's face had gone pale. "Ms. Chen, I'm sure you didn't mean—" "Oh, I think she meant exactly what she said," Robert interrupted with a laugh. "Isn't that right, Ms. Chen? You're a woman of your word?" After all, Margaret felt trapped. In business, she had learned never to back down or show weakness. Her reputation was built on being tough and decisive. But standing here, looking at Sophia's face, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. Margaret began, but the words stuck in her throat. Sophia stood up slowly, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I can play," she said simply. The crowd fell silent. Margaret stared at the girl, seeing something in her expression that reminded her of herself at that age. It was the look of someone who had been underestimated too many times and was tired of proving herself to people who didn't believe in her. "Sophia, honey," Elena said gently, "you don't have to—" "I can play," Sophia repeated, louder this time. She looked directly at Margaret. "And when I do, will you really keep your promise?" Margaret felt the weight of every eye in the room. She had built her career on being direct and honest, on following through on her commitments. But this wasn't business. This was a child's life, and she had spoken without thinking. Margaret started again, but Robert's voice cut through her hesitation. "She asked you a question, Ms. Chen. Will you keep your word?" Margaret looked at Sophia, who was still staring at her with those determined, dark eyes. Something about the girl's courage in this moment made Margaret's chest feel tight. She thought about backing down, explaining that she had spoken carelessly, that she wasn't the kind of person who adopted children. But as she looked at Sophia's face, she realized that backing down now would crush something important in this girl. It would be another adult breaking another promise, another disappointment in what Margaret suddenly suspected had been a life full of them. "Yes," Margaret heard herself say. "I keep my promises." Sophia nodded once, a small, serious movement. "Then I'll play for you," The crowd began to murmur excitedly, but Margaret barely heard them. She was still looking at Sophia, wondering what she had just committed herself to, and why a 12-year-old girl's courage was making her question everything she thought she knew about herself. Elena touched Margaret's arm gently. "Ms. Chen, perhaps we could arrange for you to visit the children's home next week. Sophia could, well, she could show you what she's learned." Margaret nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the crowd began to disperse and conversation resumed around them, she found. The next morning, Margaret sat in her corner office on the 40th floor, staring out at the city skyline. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sophia's face and heard her own voice saying those careless words. "If she can actually play piano well enough to impress me, maybe I'll adopt her." What had she been thinking? Margaret Chen didn't adopt children. She didn't even have houseplants because she forgot to water them. Her life was perfectly organized around work, efficiency, and success. There was no room for the chaos and responsibility that came with raising a child. Her assistant, Kelly, knocked on the door and entered with Margaret's usual morning coffee and tablet showing the day's news. Kelly had worked for Margaret for 5 years and knew her boss's moods better than anyone. "Rough night?" Kelly asked, noticing the dark circles under Margaret's eyes. "Something like that," Margaret muttered, taking the coffee gratefully. Kelly hesitated at the door. "Ms. Chen, I hope you don't mind, but I saw the news coverage from last night's charity gala." Margaret's stomach dropped. "News coverage?" Kelly pulled out her phone and showed Margaret a local news website. The headline read, "Tech CEO makes shocking adoption promise to young girl." Below it was a photo of Margaret talking to Sophia, with Robert Hamilton grinning in the background. "It's been shared quite a bit on social media," Kelly said carefully. "People seem interested in the story." Margaret scrolled through the article, her heart sinking with each paragraph. The reporter had captured her exact words and painted the story as a feel-good tale about a successful businesswoman offering hope to an orphaned child. The comments section was already filling up with people praising her generosity and expressing excitement about seeing what would happen next. "This is a disaster," Margaret said quietly. Kelly sat down across from her, something she only did when she had something important to say. "Ms. Chen, can I ask you something? Did you mean what you said?" Margaret looked up from the phone. "I don't know, it just came out. That man was being so pushy, and everyone was staring, and I just reacted." "But what did you think when you saw her? The girl, I mean." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Sophia's small fingers moving across her lap, the way she had looked up with such determination when she said she could play. "She reminded me of myself at that age," Margaret admitted. "Stubborn, determined to prove everyone wrong." Kelly smiled softly. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Before Margaret could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Chen? This is Elena Rodriguez from Sunshine Children's Home. I hope I'm not calling too early." Margaret's pulse quickened. "No, it's fine. I was just thinking about last night." "I was hoping we could talk," Elena said, "about Sophia and about what you said." Margaret closed her eyes. "Ms. Rodriguez, I need to be honest with you. I spoke without thinking. I'm not really the kind of person who adopts children. My life is complicated, and I work all the time, and I don't know anything about raising kids." "I understand," Elena said gently. "But Ms. Chen, I've worked with children for 15 years, and I saw something in Sophia's face last night that I haven't seen in a long time. Hope. Real hope." Margaret felt that familiar twist in her stomach. "But what if I disappoint her? What if I can't follow through?" "What if you don't have to decide that right now?" Elena suggested. "What if you just came to visit? You could see where Sophia lives, meet the other children, and maybe hear her play. No commitments, no pressure, just see what happens." Margaret found herself considering it. In business, she always gathered all available information before making major decisions. Maybe she owed it to herself and to Sophia to at least see what she was dealing with. "When?" Margaret asked. Whenever works for you. Sophia has been asking about you all morning. She's very excited about the chance to play for you. Margaret felt a pang of guilt mixed with something else she couldn't identify. How about this afternoon? I can move some meetings around. That would be wonderful. Sophia will be so happy. After hanging up, Margaret sat back in her chair and tried to process what she had just agreed to. Kelly was watching her with an expression that was half worried, half hopeful. You're really going to see her, aren't you? Kelly asked. I'm going to get this resolved, Margaret said firmly. I'll explain that I made a mistake, help them find Sophia a good family, maybe make a donation to the children's home. It's the responsible thing to do. But even as she said it, Margaret wasn't sure she believed her own words. Meanwhile, across town at Sunshine Children's Home, Sophia sat on her narrow bed, staring at her hands. The room she shared with 3 other girls was small but clean, with cheerful yellow walls and mismatched furniture donated by various community members over the years. Elena had just told her that Ms. Chen was coming to visit that afternoon, and Sophia's heart was beating so fast she could barely think straight. She had spent the morning practicing on her cardboard keyboard, running through every piece she had taught herself from the old music book. Sophia, are you okay? Asked her roommate Lily, a 10-year-old girl with red curls and freckles. You look like you're going to throw up. I'm fine, Sophia said, though her voice shook a little. Are you nervous about playing for that lady? Lily climbed onto Sophia's bed and sat beside her. Danny told everyone at breakfast about what happened at the fancy party. Sophia nodded. What if I'm not good enough? What if she was just making fun of me? Lily frowned. Then she's mean, and you don't want her to adopt you anyway. Sophia had been thinking about that all morning. Part of her worried that Ms. Chen had been joking, that this whole thing was some kind of cruel game adults played. But another part of her, the part that had been dreaming of having a real family for 2 years, couldn't help but hope. I just want to play well, Sophia said quietly. Even if she doesn't adopt me, I want her to know that I really can play. Elena appeared in the doorway, smiling warmly. Sophia, honey, want to come help me get the music room ready? The music room was really just a small space that used to be a storage closet. Elena had cleared it out the year before and put the old piano inside, along with a few chairs and some sheet music that various donors had contributed over time. The piano was a 1970s upright that had seen better days. Several keys stuck, and it hadn't been properly tuned in years, but it was the only real piano at the children's home. Sophia ran her fingers over the keys, pressing them gently to warm up. She had spent countless hours in this room, teaching herself to read music and figuring out how to make melodies that sounded right even on the imperfect instrument. What are you going to play for her? Elena asked, sitting in one of the chairs. Sophia had been thinking about this all morning. I want to play something beautiful, something that shows her that music isn't just notes on a page, but something that can make people feel things. Elena smiled. You already understand something that many professional musicians never learn. Music is about emotion, not just technique. Sophia practiced for an hour, her small fingers moving across the keys with growing confidence. She had chosen 3 pieces: a simple Bach melody that showed her technical skill, a folk song that demonstrated her ability to add her own emotional interpretation, and a more challenging piece by Chopin that she had been working on for months. As the afternoon approached, other children began gathering outside the music room. Word had spread through the home that something important was happening, and everyone wanted to be part of Sophia's big moment. She's going to do great, said Tommy, a 14-year-old who had been at the home longer than anyone. Sophia's got more musical talent in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. What if the lady doesn't like it? Worried Danny, the boy who had talked to Margaret at the gala. Then the lady doesn't know good music when she hears it, Tommy replied firmly. Elena clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. Ms. Chen will be here in about an hour. I want everyone to remember that this is Sophia's special day, so let's make sure she feels supported, okay? The children nodded seriously. Life at Sunshine Children's Home had taught them all to stick together and celebrate each other's opportunities, because chances for something special didn't come along very often. Sophia sat at the piano bench, closing her eyes and trying to calm her nerves. She thought about the music book that had started it all, a tattered volume of classical pieces that someone had donated along with a box of old clothes. She remembered the first time she had tried to match the notes on the page with sounds on the piano. How frustrated she had been when nothing sounded right, but she had kept trying day after day until gradually, the music began to make sense. She had learned to hear the melodies in her head before she played them, to feel the rhythm in her body before her fingers found the keys. Now, sitting in the small music room with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, Sophia made herself a promise. No matter what happened with Ms. Chen, no matter whether she got adopted or not, she was going to play her very best. She was going to show everyone, including herself, that all those hours of practice and dreaming had been worth something. She was going to prove that a girl from a children's home with no formal training and no fancy piano could create something beautiful enough to change someone's mind. Margaret's black sedan pulled up to Sunshine Children's Home at exactly 3 o'clock. She sat in the back seat for a moment, looking at the modest 2-story building with its cheerful blue trim and small garden out front. It wasn't what she had expected. Somehow she had imagined something more institutional, more sad. Instead, the building looked warm and welcoming, like someone actually cared about making it a home. Her driver, Mr. Peterson, turned around. "Should I wait, Ms. Chen?" Margaret hesitated. Her first instinct was to say yes, to keep an escape route available. But something about that felt wrong, like she was already planning to disappoint Sophia before she had even heard her play. "No, that's okay. I'll call when I'm ready to leave." She walked up the front path, noting the small vegetable garden and the colorful chalk drawings on the sidewalk. A handmade sign by the door read, "Welcome to our home," in cheerful letters decorated with painted flowers. Elena opened the door before Margaret could knock, as if she had been watching for her arrival. "Ms. Chen, thank you so much for coming," Elena said warmly. "Sophia has been practicing all day. She's very excited to play for you." Margaret followed Elena inside, immediately struck by how different the children's home felt from what she had imagined. The walls were painted in bright, cheerful colors and children's artwork hung everywhere. The furniture was clearly second-hand, but it was clean and arranged to create cozy spaces for reading and playing. "How many children live here?" Margaret asked as they walked down a hallway lined with photographs. 18 right now," Elena replied. "Ages 6 to 17. Some are here temporarily while we work with their families. Others are waiting for adoption. And a few are long-term residents who will age out of the system." Margaret stopped in front of a bulletin board covered with school certificates, artwork, and photos of the children at various activities. Her eyes found Sophia's name on several academic achievement awards. "She does well in school?" Margaret asked. "Sophia is one of our brightest students," Elena said proudly. "She especially loves literature and history, though music is her real passion. She writes little stories sometimes, usually about characters who overcome difficult situations through music." They passed a common room where several children were doing homework around a large table. Margaret recognized Danny from the gala, and he waved enthusiastically when he saw her. "Is that the piano lady?" called out a little girl with pigtails. "Sophia's going to play so good," added another child. Elena laughed. "Everyone here is very supportive of each other. When one child has an opportunity, we all celebrate it." Margaret found this touching in a way she hadn't expected. In her competitive business world, colleagues were more likely to see each other's success as a threat than something to celebrate. They stopped outside a door marked Music Room. Elena knocked gently. "Sophia? Ms. Chen is here." The door opened, and Sophia appeared looking nervous but determined. She had changed into a simple white dress that was clearly her best outfit, and her dark hair was neatly braided. Margaret noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "Hello, Ms. Chen," Sophia said politely. "Thank you for coming to hear me play." "Hello, Sophia," Margaret replied, surprised by how formal the girl was being. "I'm looking forward to it." The music room was smaller than Margaret had expected, with barely enough space for the old upright piano and a few chairs. But someone had clearly made an effort to make it special. Fresh flowers sat on top of the piano, and the sheet music was neatly organized. Margaret sat in one of the chairs while Elena settled beside her. Sophia took her place at the piano bench, adjusting the height and positioning her hands over the keys. "I've prepared 3 pieces for you," Sophia said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke about music. "The first is a Bach invention that shows classical technique. The second is a folk melody where I can demonstrate musical interpretation. And the third is a Chopin waltz that I've been working on for several months." Margaret was impressed by Sophia's professional approach. The girl was treating this like a real audition, taking it seriously in a way that showed both respect for the music and determination to do her best. "Whenever you're ready," Margaret said gently. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, something had changed. The nervousness was still there, but it was overshadowed by a kind of calm confidence that Margaret had seen in successful performers. Sophia began with the Bach piece, her small fingers moving precisely across the keys. Despite the piano's limitations and her lack of formal training, Margaret could hear that Sophia understood the structure and logic of the music. Her timing was excellent, and she played with a clarity that spoke of hours of careful practice. But it was when Sophia moved to the folk song that Margaret really began to pay attention. The girl didn't just play the notes, she told a story with them. The melody spoke of longing and hope, of sadness transformed into something beautiful. Margaret found herself leaning forward, drawn in by the emotion Sophia was weaving into every phrase. Other children had quietly gathered outside the music room, and Margaret could see their faces through the partially open door. They were watching Sophia with the kind of pride and support that Margaret had never experienced in her own childhood. Then Sophia began the Chopin waltz, and Margaret felt her breath catch. This was far more challenging than the other pieces, requiring technical skill that seemed impossible for a self-taught 12-year-old. But Sophia attacked it with a fearlessness that reminded Margaret of herself in high-stakes business negotiations. The girl's interpretation was raw and emotional in a way that formal training might have polished away. She played some passages with the fierce determination of someone who had fought for everything she had ever gained. Other sections flowed with a gentleness that spoke of dreams carefully protected through difficult times. Margaret realized she was witnessing something remarkable. This wasn't just a talented child playing piano. This was an artist expressing her soul through music, using technical skill as a vehicle for deep emotional communication. When Sophia finished, the room was silent for a moment. Margaret could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sounds of children playing outside. Sophia sat very still, her hands resting on the keys, waiting for Margaret's response. "That was," Margaret began, then stopped. She had been prepared to offer polite praise before explaining why adoption wasn't possible. Instead, she found herself genuinely moved by what she had just heard. "That was beautiful," Margaret said honestly. "You have real talent, Sophia. More than talent. You have something special." Sophia's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire expression. "Really? You really think so?" "I know so," Margaret replied. "I've heard professional musicians who couldn't convey emotion the way you just did." Elena was beaming. "Sophia, honey, why don't you show Ms. Chen your practice setup in your room?" Sophia eagerly led Margaret upstairs to the room she shared with 3 other girls. Margaret's eyes immediately went to the cardboard keyboard taped to Sophia's desk. Each key was carefully drawn and labeled, and the cardboard was worn smooth from hours of use. "I made this when I first started learning," Sophia explained. "I could practice finger positions and memorize pieces even when I couldn't use the real piano." Margaret picked up the music theory book from Sophia's nightstand. It was an old library discard, with pages that had been read so many times they were soft as fabric. Notes were written in the margins in Sophia's careful handwriting, and pieces of paper marked favorite sections. "You learned all of this from one book?" Margaret asked. "Mostly," Sophia nodded. "Elena helped me find some videos, online sometimes, but mostly it was just the book and lots of practice." Margaret flipped through the pages, seeing the evidence of Sophia's dedication in every margin note and dog-eared page. She thought about her own childhood, how she had taught herself business principles by reading every book she could find in the library. The determination was the same, but Sophia's motivation was pure love of music rather than the desire to escape poverty that had driven Margaret. "Sophia," Margaret said carefully, "what do you want to happen now? With the music, I mean." Sophia was quiet for a moment, thinking seriously about the question. "I want to keep learning. I want to understand music better, maybe learn different styles. And someday, I want to play for people and make them feel the way music makes me feel." "And what about—" Margaret hesitated, then decided to be direct. "What about what I said last night about adoption?" Sophia looked down at her hands. "I've been thinking about that a lot. I know you didn't really mean it, not the way it sounded. You were just trying to make a point about how people shouldn't make promises they can't keep." Margaret felt a stab of guilt at how perceptive Sophia was. "But," Sophia continued, looking up with those serious dark eyes, "even if you don't want to adopt me, I'm glad I got to play for you. No one has ever listened to my music the way you just did. That means something to me." Margaret sat down on Sophia's bed, feeling overwhelmed by the girl's maturity and grace. Sophia wasn't asking for anything, wasn't demanding that Margaret follow through on her rash promise. She was simply grateful for the opportunity to share her gift. "Sophia, can I ask you something personal?" Sophia nodded. "What happened to your parents?" 3 days had passed since Margaret's visit to Sunshine Children's Home, and she hadn't been able to stop thinking about Sophia. She found herself distracted during important meetings, staring out her office window and hearing echoes of that Chopin waltz in her mind. Her phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters, social media influencers, and even a few television producers who had caught wind of the story. The local news article had been picked up by national outlets, and somehow Margaret's offhand comment had become a feel-good story that people across the country were following. "Ms. Chen, Channel 7. News is on line 3, Kelly announced, poking her head into Margaret's office. "They want to know when you're planning to hear Sophia play again." Margaret rubbed her temples. "Tell them I have no comment. That's what I've been saying for 3 days, but they keep calling. And the social media attention is getting intense. Sophia plays piano is trending on Twitter." Margaret groaned. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. What had started as a private moment between her and Sophia was becoming a public spectacle. "There's something else," Kelly said hesitantly. "Elena Rodriguez called. She says some reporters showed up at the children's home yesterday, trying to interview Sophia. The poor girl is getting overwhelmed by all the attention." Margaret felt a flash of protective anger. Sophia was just a child who wanted to play piano, not a celebrity to be exploited for a heartwarming news story. "Get Elena on the phone," Margaret said decisively. "I need to talk to her." When Elena picked up, she sounded tired and stressed. "Ms. Chen, thank you for calling back. I'm not sure what to do about all this media attention. Sophia is trying to handle it well, but it's a lot for a 12-year-old. "I'm sorry," Margaret said sincerely. "I never intended for this to become such a public thing." "I know you didn't. But Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something directly. Have you decided what you're going to do? Because Sophia is starting to hope again, and I'm worried about what will happen if—" Elena didn't finish the sentence, but Margaret understood. Sophia was beginning to believe that Margaret might actually follow through on her promise, and the longer this dragged out, the more devastating it would be if Margaret backed away. "I honestly don't know," Margaret admitted. "Elena, I'm a 38-year-old workaholic who lives alone and doesn't know the first thing about raising children. But I also can't stop thinking about Sophia's music and about what she said about her parents. Ms. Chen, can I give you some advice from someone who has worked with children for 15 years? Please. The fact that you're scared means you're taking this seriously. The people who shouldn't adopt children are the ones who think it will be easy. Parenting isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about caring enough to figure it out as you go." Margaret was quiet for a moment, processing Elena's words. "What does Sophia think about all this attention? She's handling it better than I expected, honestly. Yesterday, when the reporters were here, she told them that music isn't about fame or attention. She said it's about sharing something beautiful with people who need to hear it. Margaret smiled despite her stress. That sounded exactly like something Sophia would say. Elena, I want to come back. But not for the media, and not because I feel pressured. I want to hear Sophia play again. Really listen this time without all the confusion from that first night. When? Tomorrow afternoon. And Elena? I want to hear her play something she chooses, something that means something to her personally. Not an audition piece, just her music. The next afternoon, Margaret arrived at Sunshine Children's Home to find a small crowd of reporters and neighbors gathered outside. Her heart sank as she realized there was no way to make this visit private. Elena met her at the door with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about this. Word got out somehow that you were coming back. Margaret looked at the crowd, then at Elena. Is there a back entrance? Yes, but Ms. Chen, I think maybe it's time to just face this head on. Sophia is inside and she's ready. She knows the reporters are here, and she wants to play anyway. Margaret took a deep breath. In business, she had learned that sometimes you had to move forward even when circumstances weren't ideal. Okay, let's do this. They entered through the front door, and Margaret was surprised to see that the common room had been rearranged. The old piano had been moved to the center of the room with chairs arranged in a semicircle around it. All the children from the home were there, along with Elena and several staff members. Through the windows, Margaret could see the faces of reporters and neighbors pressed against the glass. Sophia sat at the piano bench, looking calm despite all the attention. She had chosen to wear the same white dress from their first meeting, and her hair was braided with small flowers that one of the other girls had obviously helped her add. Hello, Miss Chen, Sophia said when she saw Margaret. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for inviting me, Margaret replied, taking a seat in the front row next to Elena. Sophia looked around at all the people watching her, then back at Margaret. I know there are a lot of people here, and I know everyone wants to know what's going to happen with us. But right now, I just want to play music. Is that okay? Margaret nodded, feeling a wave of admiration for Sophia's composure. The girl was handling this pressure better than many adults Margaret knew. I chose a piece that I've never played for anyone before, Sophia continued. I wrote it myself, thinking about my parents and about finding hope even when things seem impossible. Margaret's eyes widened. Sophia had composed her own music? Sophia placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The melody started softly, with a gentle sadness that spoke of loss and longing. But gradually it began to build, with threads of hope weaving through the melancholy. The music told a story without words, moving from grief through struggle and, finally, to a kind of hard-won peace. Margaret found herself completely absorbed in the music. This wasn't just impressive for a 12-year-old. This was genuinely beautiful composition and performance that would have moved her regardless of the circumstances. Sophia had taken her raw emotions and transformed them into something universal, something that spoke to anyone who had ever lost something precious and had to find a way to keep going. As Sophia played, Margaret glanced around the room. The other children were listening with rapt attention, some of them wiping away tears. Even the staff members seemed moved by the performance. Through the windows, Margaret could see that the crowd outside had grown quiet, everyone straining to hear the music. But what struck Margaret most was Sophia herself. At the piano, the girl was completely in her element. All the nervousness and uncertainty fell away, replaced by a confidence and joy that transformed her entire presence. This was who Sophia really was. Not a sad orphan looking for sympathy, but an artist with something meaningful to share with the world. When the piece ended, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Danny started clapping, and soon everyone was applauding enthusiastically. Outside, Margaret could see the crowd cheering as well. Sophia stood up from the piano bench and walked over to Margaret. Ms. Chen, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I understand. You didn't ask for all this attention, and you shouldn't feel pressured to do something just because people are watching. Margaret looked at this remarkable girl who was somehow managing to be gracious and mature in a situation that would overwhelm most adults. Sophia was giving her an out, a way to back away gracefully without losing face. But as Margaret looked into Sophia's eyes, she realized that she didn't want an out anymore. "Sophia," Margaret said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "That was the most beautiful music I've ever heard, and I want you to know that my offer wasn't just words, I meant what I said." Sophia's eyes widened. "You mean, I mean that if you want to, if you think we could figure out how to be a family together, I would be honored to adopt you." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Sophia threw her arms around Margaret, tears streaming down her face. Margaret hugged her back, feeling tears in her own eyes for the second time in a week. "Are you sure?" Sophia whispered. "Really sure?" Margaret thought about her perfectly organized life, her quiet penthouse, her predictable routine. Then she thought about Sophia's music, about the courage and determination she had seen in this girl, about the way the other children had rallied around her with such love and support. "I'm sure," Margaret said. "I don't know how to be a mother, Sophia, but I know I want to learn, and I know that your music, your spirit, your heart, they've already changed something in me." Elena was crying openly now, and the other children were jumping up and down with excitement. Outside, Margaret could see reporters frantically taking notes and photographers capturing every moment. Sophia pulled back to look at Margaret's face. "Ms. Chen, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Will you help me get better at piano? Will you help me learn everything I need to know to become a real musician?" Margaret smiled, thinking about all the music teachers and conservatories and opportunities that she could provide, but also knowing that Sophia already had the most important thing: talent, passion, and the dedication to pursue her dreams. "Sophia, I will help you become whatever you want to become, and you can call me Margaret now. Or," she paused, the word feeling strange but right. 6 months later, Margaret stood in the wings of the city concert hall, watching Sophia warm up at the grand piano on stage. It was hard to believe how much had changed since that night at the charity gala when she had spoken those careless words that had transformed both their lives. The adoption process had taken 3 months of paperwork, home visits, and interviews with social workers. Margaret had hired the best family lawyer in the city, but even with legal help, there had been moments when the bureaucracy seemed overwhelming. Sophia had moved in with Margaret after 2 months, and they had spent the adjustment period learning how to be a family. It hadn't been easy. Margaret's penthouse apartment, with its modern furniture and pristine white walls, had felt like a museum rather than a home. Sophia had been polite but careful, afraid to touch anything or make noise. Margaret had realized that success in business hadn't prepared her for the delicate work of helping a traumatized child feel safe and loved. The breakthrough had come when Margaret decided to convert her home office into a proper music room for Sophia. They had shopped together for a beautiful baby grand piano, and Margaret had watched Sophia's face light up when it was delivered and tuned. For the first time since moving in, Sophia had looked truly at home. "Mom, are you nervous?" Sophia asked, appearing beside Margaret in her concert dress. The deep blue gown had been a gift from Elena and the children at Sunshine Home, who had all pooled their allowance money to buy it for Sophia's first major performance. "A little," Margaret admitted. "Are you?" Sophia smiled, and Margaret marveled at how much more confident the girl had become. With proper nutrition, a stable home, and the security of knowing she was loved, Sophia had blossomed in ways that went far beyond her musical abilities. "I'm excited," Sophia said. "I keep thinking about all the people who helped me get here." The concert tonight was a fundraiser for Sunshine Children's Home, organized by Margaret's company in partnership with the local symphony orchestra. Sophia would be performing as a featured soloist, playing her own composition along with 2 classical pieces. All the proceeds would go toward creating a music program at the children's home. Margaret had also quietly arranged for several other talented children from the home to receive music lessons and instruments. What had started as an impulsive promise to one girl had grown into a comprehensive program to nurture musical talent among at-risk youth. 5 minutes until you go on," the stage manager announced. Sophia took a deep breath and hugged Margaret tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Margaret hugged her back, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever she thought about how close she had come to missing this incredible girl. "Thank you for teaching me what's really important." As Sophia walked onto the stage, Margaret made her way to her seat in the front row. The concert hall was sold out, with people who had followed their story on social media mixed with classical music lovers and supporters of the children's home. Elena sat next to Margaret, along with several of the children from Sunshine Home, who had been given special permission to attend. "Look how far she's come," Elena whispered as Sophia settled at the piano. Margaret nodded, remembering the nervous girl who had played on that old upright piano 6 months ago. Sophia's transformation had been remarkable, but it wasn't just about the music lessons with the city's best teacher, or the beautiful instruments, or the stable home. It was about having someone believe in her potential and give her the freedom to reach for her dreams. Sophia began with Bach, her technique now polished by months of proper instruction but still retaining the emotional depth that had first captured Margaret's attention. The audience was completely silent, drawn in by the girl's natural musicality and obvious joy in performing. Next, she played a Rachmaninoff piece that would have challenged many adult pianists. Margaret watched with pride as Sophia navigated the complex passages with confidence and grace. The months of intensive practice had paid off, but more importantly, Sophia's love for music had only grown stronger with proper training. But it was Sophia's original composition that brought tears to Margaret's eyes. The piece had evolved since that day at the children's home, growing richer and more complex as Sophia's skills developed. It still told the story of loss and hope, but now it also spoke of new beginnings and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As Sophia played, Margaret thought about her own transformation. 6 months ago, she had been a successful but lonely woman who measured her worth entirely in professional achievements. Now, she was a mother who had learned that the most meaningful victories couldn't be found on any balance sheet. The challenges had been real. Learning to balance work with parenting responsibilities, figuring out how to discipline a child who had already experienced too much loss, navigating the complex emotions of an adopted teenager who was still grieving her birth. Parents, there had been difficult conversations, sleepless nights, and moments when Margaret wondered if she was equipped for this responsibility. But there had also been incredible joys. Sophia's laughter echoing through the apartment, the pride on her face when she mastered a difficult piece, the growing trust between them as Sophia gradually opened up about her fears and dreams. The way Sophia had started calling her mom naturally, without hesitation or awkwardness. Margaret had also been surprised by how much Sophia had taught her about business leadership. Watching her daughter's generous spirit and natural empathy had made Margaret more conscious of how she treated her employees. She had started mentoring young professionals, particularly women who reminded her of herself at that age. The skills she was learning as a parent, patience, active listening, unconditional support, had made her a better CEO. When Sophia finished her performance, the audience erupted in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Sophia stood at the piano, her face glowing with happiness and accomplishment. She looked out into the audience and found Margaret's eyes, giving her a smile that said everything they needed to say to each other. After the concert, there was a reception where donors could meet Sophia and learn more about the children's home music program. Margaret watched as her daughter graciously thanked supporters, answered questions about her music, and posed for photos with other young musicians from the program. "She's remarkable," said Dr. Williams, the symphony conductor who had worked with Sophia on tonight's performance. "I've been teaching for 30 years and I've rarely seen such natural talent combined with such emotional maturity." "She amazes me every day," Margaret replied honestly. Elena joined them, beaming with pride. "You know, Margaret, when you first came to the home, I wasn't sure this would work out. You seemed so formal, so focused on business, but watching you and Sophia together tonight, I can see how perfect this match was." Margaret laughed. 6 months ago, I would have agreed with your first assessment, but Sophia has taught me that there's more to life than profit margins and strategic plans. As the evening wound down, Margaret and Sophia drove home through the city streets, Sophia was still buzzing with excitement from the performance, chattering about the other musicians she had met and the compliments she had received. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Sophia said, as they pulled into the parking garage of their building. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Adopting me, I mean. I know your life was probably easier before." Margaret parked the car and turned to look at her daughter. "Sophia, 6 months ago I thought I had everything I wanted. I was successful, wealthy, independent. But you know what I didn't have?" Sophia shook her head. "Purpose. Real purpose. Joy. Someone to care about more than myself. You've given me all of that and more. So no, I don't regret it for even a second." Sophia smiled and unbuckled her seatbelt. "Good. Because I've been thinking about applying to that summer music camp in Vermont, and it's really expensive." Margaret laughed, remembering when her biggest financial concerns were stock options and investment portfolios. Now her money went toward music lessons, concert dresses, and camp applications, and somehow those expenses felt infinitely more meaningful. "We'll figure it out," Margaret said, using the phrase that had become their family motto for tackling new challenges. As they rode the elevator up to their apartment, Margaret reflected on how much their living space had changed. The sterile penthouse had been transformed into a real home, with Sophia's sheet music scattered on tables, photos from her performances on the walls, and the sound of piano practice filling the rooms each evening. Margaret had also made changes to her work schedule, leaving the office by 6 most days so she could have dinner with Sophia and help with homework. She had discovered that being fully present for a few hours each evening was more fulfilling than working 12-hour days. "Mom, will you listen to me practice the new piece Dr. Williams gave me?" Sophia asked as they entered the apartment. "Of course. But first, let's celebrate tonight's success." They shared a late-night snack of ice cream and talked about the evening's highlights. Sophia described the feeling of performing for such a large audience, while Margaret shared some of the conversations she had overheard about starting similar music programs in other cities. "I've been thinking," Sophia said, curling up next to Margaret on the couch.